Kash Patel faced Joy Behar's insults. Her stupid career ended. Soon after, it was a sharp, cloudless morning in Manhattan when Kash Patel's phone buzzed. The message simply read, "You've been invited to The View. Topic: patriotism in a divided America." He smirked. Obvious bait. The View wasn't a neutral arena, it was a coliseum of loud liberal voices dressed up as daytime compassion. Still, he didn't flinch. Kash had faced bigger beasts than a studio audience and a panel of performers. His team, however, wasn't so sure. "They're setting you up," warned his advisor. Joy Behar is known for smiling while sharpening the knife. Kash adjusted the cufflinks on his charcoal suit. Then let her swing. "I'll be the truth she can't laugh off." By the time his flight landed at JFK, Twitter was already sizzling. Liberal influencers sneered, "Why give airtime to Trump's enforcer?" Meanwhile, conservative voices warned, "Watch your back, Kash, they want blood." Backstage at ABC Studios, a stylist eyed him with careful disapproval. "Want a softer look?" "Lose the tie," Kash declined with a half smile. "No, let's not pretend this is a casual chat. I came armored, in fact not fabric." Meanwhile, Joy Behar was pacing her dressing room cue cards in hand, face tight with anticipation. "Let's shake things up," she said to a producer. "He's smart, but not ready for this." The audience took their seats. Lights dimmed. The iconic View theme rang out. Then came the voice, "Please welcome today's guest, Kash Patel." The applause was a cocktail of curiosity and contempt. Kash walked in calmly, eyes clear, posture firm. Joy smiled as he sat. A smile with teeth. After the warm-up banter ended, Joy leaned forward, her tone dipping into smugness. "Kash, you talk about loving this country. But let's be real, your name, your faith Hindu, right, Brahmin. You don't exactly fit the picture of the average American patriot." The room twitched. A few uneasy chuckles. One camera operator actually paused. Kash blinked slowly. "Interesting. Do you think love of country comes with a certain shade or religion? Maybe only certain Americans get to be patriotic?" Joy didn't back down. "I mean, come on. India and America have never exactly been best friends, and frankly, children of Brahmins don't grow up pledging loyalty to Jesus. So tell us, how can someone like you really serve America or even believe in it?" The gasp that followed wasn't scripted. Kash didn't blink. He didn't rage. He didn't mock back. He just smiled. "You know, Joy, you just said out loud what so many condescending elites whisper behind closed doors. You look at my skin, my name, my faith, and you see a guest in your country. But I was born here. I bled for this country. And while you were playing talk show patriot, I was briefing troops who actually fight for it." The crowd shifted. The studio producer whispered frantically into an earpiece. Joy opened her mouth, but nothing smart came out. Kash leaned in. "What you call foreign, I call freedom. Because here's what you don't get. My parents came here legally, worked 3 jobs, and raised a son who defended this nation with more loyalty than the last 5 senators you've fawned over on this couch." Applause began, not thunderous but steady, real, from both sides of the aisle. Joy's grin cracked, and Kash wasn't done. He pulled a folded page from his inside pocket. "I brought receipts. From the time you said on air that conservatives just pretend to love America while oppressing others." That was cute. But let me tell you something, Joy. Pretending is wearing a flag pin on TV while mocking faith and service behind the scenes. She laughed nervously. "You're dramatic." He smiled again, a little colder. "And you're exposed." The camera cut to commercial, but America had already tuned in. The commercial break ended, but the tension didn't. The lights came back on the audience, still murmuring. Joy Behar adjusted her chair, gave a forced smile, and looked into the camera. "Welcome back. Things got passionate before the break. Let's cool things down." But there was no cooling down. Not now. Kash Patel sat there composed as ever, hands folded, that quiet stare that had already begun to unnerve Joy. He wasn't there to entertain. He was there to expose. Joy turned to him. "Kash," she said, with the cadence of someone trying too hard to sound calm, "let's talk about unity. You talk a lot about patriotism. But isn't it true that when you work for someone as divisive as Donald Trump, you're not really helping bring the country together?" It was the classic pivot move away from the earlier firestorm and reframe the battlefield. Cash didn't take the bait. Joy, he said slowly, unity doesn't come from pretending to agree. It comes from being honest, even when it's uncomfortable. I worked for someone who believed America should come first, not Hollywood, not Brussels, not Beijing. That offended people like you, but it inspired millions who felt forgotten. Joy chuckled sharply. Oh, please, inspired or inflamed. We saw the riots, the division, the chaos. And yet, Cash replied, I don't remember conservatives torching downtown Portland for months. I don't remember Trump supporters shutting down college speakers with bullhorns and bike locks. Your side confuses destruction with dissent. Applause erupted. Not massive, but enough to rattle the host. Joy's eyes narrowed. She reached for the nuclear option. You talk about faith and values. But I have to ask Cash, your necklace, is that a Rudraksha bead or something, Hindu Brahmin, right? She said, mockingly. That's not exactly what I'd call mainstream American faith. I mean, you don't believe in Jesus, and let's be honest, kids raised in Brahmin households aren't exactly known for serving God and country. Silence. You could feel the oxygen leave the studio. The audience froze. Even the sound guy leaned away from his board. One of the producers offstage mouthed, "Oh no." Cash stared at her, then calmly touched the small beaded pendant around his neck. His voice dropped half an octave. I served this country in ways you can't begin to understand. I didn't inherit a platform to mock others. I earned a clearance to protect them. Joy tried to interrupt, but Cash lifted a finger slightly. You want to talk about faith? Joy, let's talk. My ancestors didn't arrive on yachts, they came with nothing. And instead of complaining, they worked. They prayed. They taught me that serving your nation is a form of worship. You confuse Christianity with virtue as if God only speaks in English and votes blue. The crowd stirred. But here's the real insult, Cash continued. You didn't just question my beliefs, you questioned my loyalty. You said in front of America that because I don't fit your stereotype of patriotism, I must not love this country. That my religion disqualifies me from service. Joy's smugness was evaporating, replaced by something rarer discomfort. Cash leaned slightly forward. Let me be clear. I would die for this country. Would you die for your ratings? Thunderous applause. Joy Behar sat stiffly, face stone still. She tried to smile, but it came out crooked. One of her co-hosts coughed. Another looked down at her cue card, pretending to read something. Cash wasn't done. You ask how I, a Hindu, can serve a Judeo-Christian country. And my answer is this: because America is not a religion. America is a promise that people from anywhere believing anything can rise if they work, if they contribute, if they care. A man in the audience stood and clapped. Cash turned his head slightly toward the crowd. You don't have to like me. You don't even have to agree with me. But what you will do is stop pretending that patriotism is skin deep or faith specific. You will not hijack what it means to love this country just because I don't pray your way. Joy tried again. Okay, we get it. You're passionate. But there's still a record here. You've defended someone, Trump, who's been accused of racism, misogyny, you name it. Cash's smile returned cool sharp. You mean unlike your colleague Whoopi, who once defended a man convicted of child assault on this very stage? Or like you, Joy, who wore blackface in the 70s and laughed about it? The audience gasped. Audible. Real. Cameras twitched. Joy stammered. That's taken out of context. No, it's exactly in context, Cash cut in. You don't get to set the moral bar while standing in mud. You call me dangerous, but you're the one dividing Americans with zip code prejudice and smug elitism. And with that, he paused. The studio didn't breathe. Then the wave came. Applause. Standing ovation, spontaneous and staggering. The camera crew scrambled to keep up. Someone backstage whispered, "He's flipping the room." Joy looked like she'd swallowed her own tongue. Cash straightened in his chair. You wanted a punchline. You got a headline. You tried to shame me for my background, my beliefs, and my boss. But what you really did was show millions of Americans exactly what the elite think of people like me. A producer frantically waved for a segment change. Joy glanced at the teleprompter, blinking like a deer in headlights. Cash wasn't yelling, he wasn't ranting, but somehow he was thundering. This isn't about religion, it's not about Trump. It's about who gets to be called an American. You think that label belongs to people who think like you, look like you, vote like you. I'm here to tell you it doesn't. It belongs to anyone willing to serve sacrifice and stand up, even if it's on your show. Joy turned red. The applause didn't stop. The commercial break that followed wasn't a pause, it was a triage unit in motion. Joy Behar's producers swarmed like bees around a hive that had just been kicked in the face. Whispered commands, flailing hand gestures, an assistant holding up a whiteboard scribbled with emergency pivots, shift to women's rights, safer ground. But safe ground doesn't exist when your guest just burned your seat down without raising his voice. Meanwhile, Kash Patel didn't move. He remained seated, composed, his thumb gently brushing the beaded pendant at his collarbone. He knew what had just happened. The audience wasn't just clapping, they were awakening. This wasn't about party lines anymore. It was about the raw clarity that silence couldn't ignore. As the lights faded back in and the view's bubbly theme played awkwardly beneath the static tension, Joy Behar re-entered the camera frame with a tight-lipped grin. Her voice rang falsely chipper. Well, we've certainly covered some ground today, haven't we? Kash didn't answer. Joy cleared her throat. Let's change gears for a moment and talk about women. You've worked for an administration accused by multiple women of misconduct. You talk about values. How do you square that predictable? Cowardly. Kash's reply came without hesitation. Let me ask you this, Joy. Do women only deserve to be believed when they accuse conservatives? Or does your empathy expire when the man wears a blue tie the audience stirred? I believe women are strong, he continued. I believe women deserve respect. But I also believe in due process, not trial by talk show. You, on the other hand, exploit pain for applause. You pretend it's justice, but it's just clickbait and lipstick. Gasps from the crowd, from the crew. Joy stiffened. So you're saying the women who came forward, I'm saying your concern is selective? Kash interrupted. You didn't believe Tara Reid. You covered for Cuomo. And when it's a Hollywood donor, you fall silent faster than a busted teleprompter. The audience exploded. Laughter, yes, sharp and pointed, but applause even louder. People weren't watching The View. They were watching The Reckoning. Joy reached for her coffee mug like a lifeline. Her co-host, Sunny, tried jumping in, but Kash cut through like steel. You say I defend power. I defend the truth even when it's inconvenient. You defend ideology even when it's false. At that moment, something changed. The camera panned to the audience again, row after row of mixed faces. Some were stunned. Some nodded. Others leaned forward, eyes gleaming. This was no longer daytime fluff. This was cultural warfare televised. Joy tried to move to another card. Kash beat her there. I've got your questions memorized, Joy, because they're not questions. They're traps you set for anyone who doesn't worship at your altar of progressive purity. You don't want a conversation. You want a confession, and I'm not your penitent. The room shook with another wave of applause. Then came the blow no one expected. A voice loud and clear from backstage. She's losing them. It was a junior staffer, unaware his mic was still hot. The studio went quiet again. Joy blinked fast as if trying to keep her mascara from melting. Kash turned not to gloat, but to make a point. You brought me here to humiliate me. To make a spectacle out of my difference. But you ended up revealing your own. He glanced around slowly. This show's not about inclusion. It's about submission. If you don't kneel to your politics, your faith, your version of America, you're a heretic. Joy's grin was gone. Just silence and sweat. Let me show you something, Kash said, pulling out a folded email printout from his jacket. This is the original invitation from your producer. We want a respectful dialogue on American values. Then the pre-show prep document you accidentally sent to my aide. Push him on Trump, immigration, and faith. He held it up. You don't invite guests, you ambush them. Joy's hand flew to her earpiece. You don't need a guest chair, Kash continued. You need a defendant box, because every person who disagrees with you is put on trial. He stood for a moment, just enough to change the energy. And I didn't come here to be tried, he said. I came to testify. The crowd stood. Yes, stood. It started in the back, an elderly veteran, arms crossed, rising with quiet conviction. Then a young woman in the front row, tears in her eyes, then half the room. It wasn't politics. It was awakening. Joy tried a final jab. You're very performative for someone who claims to hate television. Kash's voice came slow and devastating. and you're very threatening to someone who claims to love tolerance. Boom. Not shouted, just dropped, like truth wrapped in napalm. Applause erupted again. This time it was thundering. Joy's cue cards fluttered to the floor. Her co-host looked off camera, unsure what to do. The producers panicked. Again. A different co-host leaned in and whispered, "Go to break." Joy nodded, her hand trembling slightly. "Yeah, we'll be right back," she managed. The screen faded, but the impact didn't. Behind the scenes, chaos erupted. One producer slammed a folder onto the control board. "We've lost the audience," he growled. The social media team scrambled to contain what couldn't be contained. Now Cash Clap's back was trending in real time. TikTok had already clipped the moment he said, "I came to testify." It was everywhere. Fox News, retweets from Elon, Substack thick pieces, moderates writing, "I don't like him, but he's right." Meanwhile, back on set, Joy sat frozen. The laughter she relied on, the rhythm she mastered, the superiority she wore like perfume gone. Cash simply returned to his chair and waited, calm, ready, not for applause, but for the next question, and the next lie, and the next moment of truth. The screen faded to black, but the storm behind the scenes roared louder than ever. In the control room, phones rang nonstop. Joy Behar's head producer barked orders into his headset. "We need to reframe this. Now." A frantic intern pushed a tablet into his hands, displaying the top trending hashtag #CashOwnsTheView. Underneath it, millions of comments, memes, GIFs, all showing Joy Behar in slow motion blinking as Kash Patel torched her script live on her own stage. Back on set, Cash sat composed in the guest chair legs, crossed hands steady. His pendant caught the lights once again, not as decoration, but as a symbol. Joy had tried to mock his faith, reduce it to an exotic stereotype, and it had exploded in her face. He hadn't needed to retaliate with rage. He had used facts, restraint, and clarity. And now he had the room. When the cameras returned, the audience was already buzzing. Viewers at home didn't see the nervous pacing, the whispered curses, or the cue cards being rewritten in real time, but they felt the shift. Something had broken. Joy Behar's voice trembled slightly as she returned to air. "We've had a lively discussion today. Let's refocus on policy, shall we?" Cash leaned forward with a calm smile. "Absolutely. I love policy. It's not emotional. It's not personal. It's true by numbers, and something tells me your producers didn't expect I'd bring my own." He pulled a folder from his lap and opened it slowly, theatrically. The audience leaned in. "Let's talk immigration," he said. Joy claims compassion, but what she ignores is the data. Under the previous administration, illegal border crossings dropped by 78% year over year. Drug seizures up by double digits, human trafficking rings dismantled weekly. He looked straight at Joy. "But those aren't the headlines you like, are they? They're not tragic enough, not dramatic enough. You want cages, not context." Joy attempted to jump in, but Cash wasn't done. "And now, under your preferred administration, fentanyl deaths have skyrocketed. But please, Joy, tell me again how the border wall was the real problem." A smattering of applause, louder this time. Cash kept going. "You want to lecture me on American values, but you treat Border Patrol agents like villains, ICE like monsters, and parents concerned about school curriculum as terrorists. You have no problem weaponizing empathy when it serves your narrative. But when it contradicts your ideology, suddenly silence becomes your favorite virtue." Joy chuckled nervously. "That's your opinion." "No," Cash replied, "that's your record." The studio reacted. Audible murmurs, a few cheers. Cash didn't blink. "You know what offends me, Joy? Not your bias. Everyone has bias. It's your arrogance. You act as if the seat this show gives you the moral authority to question the loyalty of people who've actually served this country." He paused. "I didn't get rich mocking my neighbors on daytime TV. I didn't inherit an audience. I earned one by telling the truth. You call that performative. I call it patriotic." Suddenly, a voice from the crowd broke through again. "He's right." A young man in his 20s wearing a veteran pin stood up. "I served in Iraq, guys like him. They don't care what God you pray to, only if you have their back." Applause erupted again, this time sustained. Joy's face turned red. "Let's keep the audience out of this, please," she said sharply. Of course you'd say that, Kash replied. Because the moment they stop clapping on cue, they become inconvenient, Joy snapped back. This isn't a courtroom, Mr. Patel. Kash smiled. No, but it is a cross-examination. And your arguments just failed under oath of public opinion. Boom. The studio lit up like a match to gasoline. This wasn't just a guest holding his own. This was the guest rewriting the rules of the show. Joy, flustered, reached for yet another pivot. Let's talk about race. As a person of color, don't you think you have a responsibility to oppose systems of oppression instead of defending them? A classic progressive trap. But Kash had his blade ready. You mean like the education system that traps minority students in failing public schools while your friends send their kids to private academies, or the criminal justice reforms that defund police in urban areas while your neighborhood hires more security guards? Kash leaned forward again, eyes sharp. You want to talk about race, Joy? Fine. I'm the child of Indian immigrants. I've faced racism, but never once did I blame the flag. I blamed the bigot, because I know the difference between a flawed system and a flawed person. You don't. Joy opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Your version of anti-racism, Kash continued, is just self-loathing wrapped in self-congratulation. You teach young minorities to hate their own country, then you wonder why they feel powerless. That's not progress. That's poison. Standing ovation again. The audience had switched sides permanently. The producers waved frantically to cut to commercial. The control room screamed, fade out, fade out. The screen went black, but the damage was done. Backstage, it was a war zone. One PR assistant cried in the hallway. Another scrolled Twitter, where even verified liberal accounts were posting, "Did Joy just get intellectually destroyed?" on her own set. In her dressing room, Joy slammed her mug on the counter. "Who booked him?" she shouted. "Your senior producer." Her assistant mumbled, "Well, she's fired." In another room, Kash Patel quietly rehydrated, speaking to no one. He didn't need a post-game huddle. The scoreboard was clear. One guest, one message, one dismantling of an empire built on smug superiority and filtered applause. His phone buzzed. A message from a sitting senator. "You just nuked The View." He smiled, not out of ego but precision. Mission accomplished. As the crew began to reset, Joy received a producer note she didn't want to see segment canceled. "We've lost them." And for once in her career, Joy Behar didn't argue. "So I tram." The clip hit the internet like a political earthquake. Within an hour of airing, the confrontation between Kash Patel and Joy Behar dominated every feed, headline, and group chat. From Facebook to TikTok, from Fox News to Reddit threads titled "Kash Shuts It Down," the moment had leapt from television drama to full-blown cultural war. Trending hashtags exploded: faith not filters, Kash versus The View, Behar blunder. Conservative influencers hailed Kash as the voice America didn't know it was waiting for. Moderates leaned in. Even a few liberal pundits, albeit reluctantly, admitted that Behar had been caught with her mic down and her assumptions exposed. In D.C., senior staffers circulated the clip in group messages with one-word captions, "legendary." One CNN analyst tweeted this wasn't just a takedown. It was a takedown without rage. That's rare. Over at MSNBC, anchors scrambled to spin the moment maybe Kash Patel rehearsed this. Maybe it was theater. But the tone sounded less like confidence and more like containment. Meanwhile, Kash remained silent. No tweets, no follow-up statement, nothing. Because the moment didn't need his voice anymore. It had already echoed far beyond. At a gas station in rural Missouri, a retired mechanic watched the clip on his phone and muttered, "Finally, someone said it." In a cafe in Detroit, a group of Gen Z students debated whether Behar had crossed a line with the religious attack. One girl spoke up. She didn't just insult him, she insulted all of us who believe something. Across the country, pastors, soldiers, teachers, moms, immigrants all weighed in. The fire had caught. Backstage, Joy Behar's team was in shambles. Staffers argued about who failed to vet Kash's talking points. Her publicist begged her not to respond yet. "The longer we're quiet, the less oxygen we give this," he reasoned. Joy snapped. "Less oxygen, it's a bonfire. My name is trending for all the wrong reasons." That afternoon, The View canceled its next live segment. Official reason: technical realignment. The truth: panic. Ratings from the first hour were already being pulled. Audience sentiment tracked negative, not neutral, negative. For Joy. Meanwhile, Cash's office in D.C. was overwhelmed. Booking requests poured in. Hannity, The Megyn Kelly Show, CNN, even NPR reached out. His assistant Anna looked up from the phone. "You're being called a cultural moment." Cash raised an eyebrow. For telling the truth, Anna shrugged, for not apologizing for it. That night he appeared on Fox, calm, composed, still no gloating. "I didn't go on The View to win a fight," he told the host. "I went because someone needs to remind Hollywood that patriotism isn't performance, and faith, real faith, isn't a punchline." By morning, the ripple had become a wave. Talk radio exploded. Conservative stations aired the full audio multiple times. Liberal hosts were split, some attacking Cash as calculated, others quietly conceding that Joy had gone too far. Even The Atlantic ran an op-ed titled "When the Guest Becomes the Mirror." The subhead, "Kash Patel didn't dismantle Joy Behar. He reflected on her." A viral TikTok video juxtaposed Joy's attack on Cash's religion with footage of her past comments mocking evangelical Christians. Caption: "So it's not just Hindus she mocks." Got it. It reached 5 million views in 6 hours. At a Sunday church service in Georgia, the pastor quoted Cash's on-air response in his sermon. "Faith is not a costume," he said, echoing Cash. "It's not a weapon. And when it's mocked, we don't need fury. We need clarity, just like he gave." The congregation applauded. Back in New York, the View's executive team was desperate. They drafted a vague apology. It read, "We strive for respectful discourse. Sometimes passion overtakes phrasing." It was weak. Everyone knew it. Joy refused to sign it. "I'm not saying sorry for being honest," she growled. "You weren't honest," a producer muttered. "You were mean." But the story wasn't fading. At Columbia University, a professor of communications led a class discussion about the exchange. What happened here wasn't just a clash of opinions, he explained. It was a clash of assumptions. One side came with ideology. The other came with experience. A student added he didn't have to shout. That's what made it powerful. Another chimed in, "He made her look out of touch, like she doesn't get people anymore." Exactly. That was the real damage. Cash hadn't just won the argument. He had exposed something deeper that a whole class of elite voices, the Joys, the late-night comedians, the clickbait journalists, had grown too used to sneering down instead of speaking across. They weren't prepared for someone who didn't play by their rules, who didn't crave applause, who didn't need validation from their echo chamber. They weren't prepared for someone like Cash. Sponsors noticed too. One by one, brands behind The View began issuing statements. "We support respectful dialogue. We believe in inclusion." Behind the scenes, 2 major sponsors pulled future ad slots, a quiet but significant shift. Because for the first time in a long time, daytime TV wasn't just about cooking tips and celebrity gossip. It had become a battleground for the soul of the country, and Kash Patel had drawn a line. By week's end, he delivered a speech at the Liberty Forum in Texas. No teleprompter, no handlers. "I didn't ask to become a symbol," he began. "But I won't apologize for becoming one either." He paused. "People like Joy want you to think your faith makes you backwards, that your patriotism makes you a threat, that your silence means surrender. But I'm here to tell you it doesn't." The crowd rose to its feet. He continued, "If defending my country and honoring my beliefs makes me a target for mockery, then mock away. Because every time they laugh at you, they reveal how afraid they are of your strength." Another standing ovation. Louder this time, real. He walked off stage without waving, without smiling, just focused. Backstage, his aide whispered, "They're calling this the Cash effect." He nodded. Not interested in effects, interested in change. And change, it seemed, had already begun. The Cash effect didn't fade. It is rooted. 3 days after his Liberty Forum speech, Cash's office received over 30,000 emails, more than half from people who didn't even vote his way. Teachers, veterans, immigrants, even atheists. One wrote, "You didn't defend religion, you defended dignity." Across the country, school boards cited his words in debates over classroom speech. In Iowa, legislation was introduced protecting workplace religious expression, its preamble quoting Kash verbatim: "Faith is not a costume. It's not a weapon." Meanwhile, Joy Behar remained silent. Her brand's sarcastic defiance felt suddenly brittle. The View's rating slipped for the first time in 4 years. Then it happened. Kash was invited to speak at the National Renewal Conference in D.C., not as a partisan, as a cultural witness. He stood before a crowd of 40,000 and said simply, "I didn't come to divide America. It reminded me you don't have to shout to be strong. You don't have to mock to make a point. And you never ever have to bow to stay true." The crowd didn't erupt. They rose, silent, unified. Because by then they weren't clapping for a man. They were standing for themselves.